Yo, what is up, my knights of the round table? And welcome back to 6 more creepy and chilling and true Christmas scary stories. This time by B. Point Busta, or B. Period Busta. Thank you, Busta, for that, and I hope you're okay with me reacting to this. Shout outs to Busta. Please go subscribe to him if you enjoy this. And let's just get into it, guys and gals and knights of the round table everywhere. You know who you are. You know why you're here. You're here for
A few
me.
years ago, when
It's
I was
all
still living
me.
in my parents' house, it was a
I
few
love
days
you
before
all.
Christmas, and my parents had gone out to visit family for the day.
Alright.
I decided to stay home, relax, and make the
I
most
never
of
know
having the
creepy
house
shit
to
could
myself.
happen on Christmas.
And thankfully, my parents were pretty cool about me skipping the visit, as we would get chance to see our family again after Christmas. I settled in for the day, lit the fire in the living room, and chose a few movies and settled down to watch the first one. After the movie finished, I decided to go and make a snack, and it was then, from the kitchen window, that I noticed something strange. There was an old, battered-looking van parked opposite my house.
Is he gonna be
And
like Home
I could
Alone?
see some men in the front seat, just staring up at my house. I'm a pretty paranoid person, so alarm bells started to go off in my head straight away. I left the kitchen to go and find the phone, so I could call for help if needed. It was just as I picked up the phone that I heard the back gate rattle. I realized that the men were probably trying to break into the house, and I froze completely.
Anybody else getting Home Alone
In
vibes with
concept,
me?
it is easy to think that you would quickly call the police, but I was so scared, I don't think I even blinked for a while. There were 2 back doors to this house.
Blessing.
One led into the kitchen, and the other was a sliding door into the dining room. It was when I heard loud bangs against the kitchen door that I knew I had to do something. I ran into the downstairs bathroom, locked the door, and phoned 999. There are men trying to break into my house. I'm home alone and scared. Please, help. I gave my address, and the operator told me a unit had been dispatched and would be there soon.
999.
I crouched down behind the door, shaking and trying not to cry. The noise from outside
999?
had stopped.
Is that
I ventured out of the
999?
bathroom and I heard police sirens and let the officers in.
Yeah, boys
The
in
van had
blue
gone,
here.
and the back door had not been kicked in. I guess the deadbolt on the door held them at bay, and they must have run. They had a good attempt though. The door looked damaged and had to be replaced. Apparently, there had been a number of burglaries in the area recently, and these guys were probably on the lookout for people's Christmas shopping. I guess my house looked empty because there were no cars in the driveway. I don't know what they would have done if they had successfully got in and found me there, and I don't want to think too much about it. The guys were never caught, and I never saw the van in the area again, which means they're still out there. But I'll never forget how scary that experience was, and I'll never, ever take any chances with home security. Number 5. My name is Lance, and this story takes place in 1998, on Christmas Day.
2
Let
years
me give
before
a
I was
quick
born.
backstory. My aunt was pregnant at the time and
I was
wasn't
born
due
in
until
2000.
after the New Year's. She had 2 kids already, and they took about 41 weeks each. If you don't know, normal pregnancies are about 40 weeks. Also, my mum had a boyfriend at the time, Jim, who was into cage fighting. He wasn't that big, but he had been doing martial arts since he was around my age, which was a fair amount of time. My auntie, who wasn't due to have a baby for another 2 weeks, she went into labour in the morning of Christmas Eve. So, since we had a tiny apartment, we went to their big suburban house so my mum could watch my 2 other cousins. My mum's boyfriend was spending the holidays with us and tagged along. We brought all of our presents and we packed everything over the next few days and we headed over. When we got there, my grandma was there. She could have watched the kids herself, but we had already planned to go over on Christmas Day, and my grandma was a bit of a drinker. We got everything hauled into the home, and I went to the backyard to play with my cousins.
I don't think either of
They
my
were only 2 and
grandparents
3 at the
drank
time,
at their age.
so it wasn't that exciting. We played various games on a yellow roof car, and
Like, my
we also
grandmother
played
drank
cops and robbers for
occasionally,
some
but
time.
it was like only like New
We
Year's
ended
or
up going to
something.
bed early that night, exhausted after all of our playing. Still no news on the arrival of the baby yet though. At around midnight, I woke up to my mum and grandma talking happily. The arrival of my new cousin had come, which was awesome.
Yeah.
They were across the hall in my aunt and uncle's room, and I went in. I didn't see Jim anywhere, so I figured he may have gone to the bathroom or the kitchen or something. He usually didn't turn on lights out of respect for people sleeping. My cousin had been born exactly at midnight on Christmas Day, making her the best Christmas present for our family. As my mum and grandma calmed down after all the excitement, I was ushered back into the bedroom.
You know, I was gonna
I was
say how
smiling,
you get
not
Christmas
wanting to
and
wait to
birthday
tell my
gifts on the
cousins
same
about their
day.
new sister. And at that moment, I heard a loud bang from the front of the house. I heard Jim yell to my mum to call 911, as sounds from the front room indicated he was fighting with someone. I ran to the front of the house to see what was going on, hearing a thud as I got closer, followed by silence, when I saw a man step in front of me. It was Jim, and he looked pissed. I saw blood dripping from his hand, but it was coming from higher up on his arm. He moved me inside and went to the bathroom. I looked in the living room to see a man lying face down in the doorway. He was dressed in all black and had a backpack on, and he wasn't moving. When the police arrived, they questioned Jim as the paramedics arrived to look him over. The guy in the doorway, he still hadn't moved. The paramedics removed the mask from the guy and cut his shirt off to try and resuscitate him. Jim said something to one of the officers, and he told the paramedics that the guy's neck, it snapped. It turns out that Jim had slammed the guy on his head after he attempted to follow him in from getting some extra presents from the car. The loud bang we heard was a gunshot that had barely hit Jim in the arm. The paramedics looked me over after an officer noticed that I had blood on me as well, but it wasn't mine. Jim was taken to hospital and he was returned later that day. Turns out 2 things happened that night. My cousin was born and Christmas was saved. Jim was also found innocent of unintentional manslaughter after the courts decided that it was all self-defense.
They tried to shoot him.
Number 4.
He got fucked up. That brother got
So,
fucked up. He picked
it
the wrong
started maybe
house.
3 years ago. I'm now
Willie's
17,
son up in
but
there.
I still remember it like it was yesterday. For some background, my name is Josh, and my friends Nick and Dan were the same age as me, which was about 14 at the time. We had been building a treehouse by a small creek we all lived by, and we planned to bring a generator and such to make a cool gaming room.
Alright.
This night, we had all decided to go on our weekly night walk to go check out our treehouse. It was Christmas Day, and we had all decided that spending time opening another lame set of clothes was not what we wanted to do, so we went off to the treehouse. We all brought flashlights along, and mine, being
So
the
when you're a
best of the
kid, you hate
3,
getting
was
clothes.
put
When
in
you get
front
older,
of all
you
of
just
us.
love it.
I live in California, so it wasn't as cold as like Boston or something, but it was still pretty damn cold and pitch black, so we kept smacking into tree branches that the flashlight couldn't reach. As we neared the treehouse, I
You're a
kept on
kid, you
feeling
hate
like
clothes.
being
You're like the worst
watched or
thing.
something. I asked Nick and Dan if they felt it too, to which they replied yes. At some point during the night, we heard a human-like scream, which ended up scaring the shit out of us, but it was just the geese that our neighbours had in their backyard. As we got closer to the tree, we started to notice that there were footprints in the soft mud, but we brushed it off as one of our earlier visits, and we kept on going.
Are
This
we
is
sure
something
here,
that
people?
I regret to this very day. Oh, and another piece of background. Our hideout was in the middle of nowhere, so there was no way anyone could have really been here to expect us. Finally, after trudging through darkness
We're
for
in
some
the
time,
middle of
we saw the old
nowhere.
black oak tree in the middle of the clearing, and
Nowhere.
we stopped at the base. My fingers were freezing cold, and so were Nick's. Dan was smart enough to bring gloves though, so we sent him up the tree
That
to
was
do a
me.
routine
I
check.
was that
The
kid.
entire time, I just felt really wrong.
I was that
I
kid
can't
who always
explain
brought
it.
gloves outside in the
It
winter.
was like shit was about to go down or something. When Dan got to the final step, he peeked
there was
into the
snow, I
floor
had gloves.
and just froze and muttered,
Most of the time.
What the fuck?
to which he then said,
Oh shit.
and jumped off the tree and landed on us. I started swearing and asking him what the hell was wrong, and just as he was about to answer, this half-naked old man jumped out and started screaming at the top of his lungs like a fucking banshee. scaring the shit out of myself and Nick, it prompted us to all run. As we crashed through the woods and tried to get back onto the main road, we heard this fucking creeper start to chase us, and we started booking it through the forest. At one point, I remember tripping and then getting up pretty sure I had broken my finger or something. Finally, we saw the main road and each split off to go to our houses, screaming like pansies. The old guy ended up chasing me, since I was still ridiculously fat and out of shape at the time, making me slower than the others. When I saw the hill that my house was on top of, I ran like a marathon runner and sprinted up, where I finally had to stop for some breath. When I looked behind me, the old guy was at the base of the hill, just looking at me. He then just grinned like he was utterly and truly insane, and when I pointed my light at him, he ended up just running back into the woods. I didn't end up telling anyone because of the trouble I might get into, and we all ended up never going into those woods ever again. It's been 3 years now, and I still get chills when I have to pass them on my bike. As far as I know, that crazy old guy is still out there, somewhere, in the woods.
Number 3.
When I was young, my parents really encouraged my brother and I to believe in Santa Claus.
That was creepy.
It was partly
That
because
was
of
actually
our Christian
legitimately
upbringing,
creepy.
and partly that they wanted us to have that magical excitement that surrounds the Christmas holiday for as long as possible. We would run downstairs to the fireplace on Christmas morning and gleefully tear into the single present left for each of us by Santa, in addition to the gifts from family and friends beneath the tree. The year I stopped believing in Santa Claus was a confusing one, and I didn't understand the full ramifications of what had happened for several years afterward. I was still pretty young, about 7 or 8, but fairly old to still be believing in a jolly fat man in a red suit who squeezes down a chimney. Television holiday specials.
I think I was 7 or
and
8 when I
trips to the
stopped
mall
believing,
or
when I
local
was
church for
told.
photos with Kris Kringle were enough to reinforce what my parents had told me. So, 'twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, except for 2 rambunctious youngsters who were absolutely set on waiting up for Santa, and their 2 exasperated parents. My brother and I had gotten into the cookie tins, so we were about 10 kinds of wired, and we weren't going to bed until we heard reindeer on the roof. It was going on at about 11:30 at night, very late for us in those days, when bedtime was around 8 p.m. Our parents were on the verge of bribing us with just about anything to get us out of their hair, when we saw a figure in a red and white suit walk past the living room window. My little brother, all of 4 years at the time, yelled, "Santa!" and both of us rushed to the front door. We couldn't understand why my mum suddenly grabbed us and hustled us upstairs, or why Dad was quickly locking the door and rushing for the phone while our Siberian husky stood in the entryway and growled. We whined and complained as we were tucked into bed, in our parents' room, oddly enough. But Mum insisted that we'd been very good and waited up for Santa, and now that he was here, it was time for us to go to sleep. It took some doing on her part, but she convinced us that if Santa knew that we were all still up, we might not get any presents.
Sure.
So we had better go to sleep on the double. So we burrowed under the covers and squeezed our eyes shut, like all kids pretending to be asleep. In mere minutes, the sugar crash hit, and we fell asleep for real. Just before I drifted off though, I heard my dad come into the room and say something like,
"Jerry's here."
This was confusing to me, as our neighbour Jerry was a police officer, and I couldn't figure out what the reason he could have been visiting on Christmas for. But I was too sleepy to puzzle it out, and I didn't hear anything more before visions of sugar plums pulled me under. In the morning, our expected gifts from Santa were on the hearth, and we ripped into our pile of gifts with frenzy. It was a good Christmas that year. Dad had won some money in the state lottery, and it had resulted in some much needed renovations to our house, as well as a vacation to Disney World, and a whole lot of very nice presents for the family. He had been in a lottery pool with some friends at his job, and they all received a share of the winnings. It was actually on the local news and everything. It didn't dawn on me until much later that neither of my parents looked like they had slept. They were both drinking coffee, which was highly unusual, and they smiled at our antics and thankful hugs, but otherwise, they weren't as energetic as most mornings. For months, I chalked it up to having to wrangle my brother and I the night before. A few months later, a classmate of mine brought in a newspaper article for current events at the school. For those who've never had to sit through it, this involves students bringing in stories from periodicals and fumbling through a 2-minute presentation of the salient points.
I remember us
usually
doing that.
halfway slept through this part of the day, but not this time. The article was about a man who'd attempted to break into several houses in the week leading up to Christmas holidays. He'd been arrested on Christmas Eve while trying to break into an occupied home dressed as Santa, and his trial date had just been set for later in the year. As sad as it sounds, that moment was the moment I stopped believing in Santa Claus. I'd previously thought that the red suit was something of a trademark, and surely only Santa himself could wear it. But heck, if any old joker could put on that suit, even one who robbed the houses, then surely, to my young mind, it meant there was no Santa. The pieces didn't fall into place until several years later, when I brought the incident of the very late Christmas Eve up to my mother in conversation. She looked shaken for a minute, but then told me I was probably old enough to know what had actually happened. The man from the newspaper article had been tracking down the people from Dad's lottery pool. He knew they'd all won money, and so would probably have nice new purchases and possibly cash, or even expensive holiday gifts squirreled away in their homes. He'd broken into a couple of my dad's co-workers' houses and made off with jewelry and electronics, but he'd never been there when anyone was home. Also, another scary element to this story is that the things he'd stolen, they were sold off for drug money. On Christmas Eve, he'd gotten hopped up on something or other, and got into his head to dress up as Santa and to try and hit one more house. Ours. He'd showed up close to midnight, probably thinking we'd all be in bed, and he tried to open the front door. Fortunately, my dad managed to throw the deadbolt in time and called our neighbour, who was a police officer and was on duty at the time. His name was Jerry, and he came over right away. Jerry put the guy in handcuffs right there on the front porch and called for backup. The would-be Santa bandit was hauled away while my brother and I slept in our parents' bed upstairs. I don't know why any thief in his right mind would have tried to enter a house where there were clearly lights on and people awake, especially children.
Drugs.
The drugs probably had something to do with it.
They had a lot to do with
I
it.
never found out what it was he was on, or whether he was carrying any weapons.
Meth.
All I know is
Crack,
that
I don't know.
I'm very grateful for my parents being such quick thinkers. Otherwise, that year, Christmas may have turned out very differently.
Yeah.
Number 2.
Wait, why the fuck wasn't his
It was around
door
Christmas
locked?
time when this
Like,
happened.
my
So,
parents never
our
left the
tree
door
was set up
unlocked
in the
on
living room,
Christmas.
and the
My
whole
parents
house was
never left the door
decorated as
unlocked
well.
to this day.
My brother and I were both in
They
junior
never left
high.
it unlocked.
He was in 9th grade,
still
and
don't.
I was in the 8th.
We lock
It was
the doors.
nighttime, around 2 or 3 in the morning, when I woke up because I desperately needed
Damn
a
sure
drink
locked
of
it on
water.
Christmas. We locked
So,
the front, back
quietly
door,
left my
locked the
room
windows
and
on
headed to the
Christmas
kitchen.
because that's. As I got
As I
older,
turned the
I
corner
was
that opened
told
up
that's
into
like
the living
when
room,
a lot of robberies
I saw
happen, which
something
that disproved.
incredibly bizarre.
When I got older and
Standing
was
in
told
pitch
about
darkness,
Santa or stop
save
believing
for
in
the light
Santa,
coming from the tree, stood my brother.
I kind of
in
asked,
the
okay,
center of
why
the
did
living
we
room,
lock the
staring
doors?
at the Christmas tree. His neck was craned backwards, almost painfully, and he was just staring.
Or like this?
His expression was unreadable, and he didn't acknowledge my presence,
Or this?
nor did he look away though. I noticed he was holding something, and as I got closer, I saw he held 3 of the many ornaments that were hanging on the tree. 2 decorative glass bulbs and 1 miniature stuffed Santa ornament. I decided that he just couldn't get to sleep and was admiring the tree, or maybe he'd found the ornaments on the floor and was in the process of putting them back on the tree. So I just kept walking towards the kitchen. I had my back to him as I filled up a cup of water. So I jumped when I heard a loud crack and some rustling of the tree. I quickly looked behind me to see the tree swaying a little bit, and my brother still glued to the same spot, staring upwards. I couldn't figure out what had made that noise, so I watched him, knowing it must have been something he did. And, sure enough, a couple of seconds later, I saw him place one of the ornaments he was holding in his other free hand, and then he violently hurled it towards the tree. He slowly turned his head towards me, and then just stared in my general direction. He didn't say anything, he didn't smile or laugh like it was a joke. He didn't move. It was just eerie,
Beat his
sinister
ass.
even. I was weirded out, and I decided I didn't want to go back past my brother again to get back to my room. So I made a beeline to the garage and waited out there in one of our unlocked cars for a while with the garage lights on until I deemed it safe to head back inside. It was dead silent. I was terrified he was going to pull a prank on me and turn out the garage lights and lock the door to the house so I couldn't get back inside. But nothing happened. I only waited for about 15 minutes because by now it was very late and I was tired. So I gently opened the car door, walked up the steps to get back inside the house, inched open the door and stepped inside. It took my eyes a minute to adjust to the darkness, but once they did, something sitting on the top of the countertop in the kitchen caught my eye. There, not a foot away from where I stood, sat the third ornament my brother had been holding, a single ruby red glass decorative bowl. I kind of just stood there staring at it for a moment, thinking he was going to pop out at me from somewhere, but he didn't. I peeked around the corner into the living room and saw, to my relief, that my brother, he was gone. He must have gone back downstairs. Nothing else happened that night, but it has stuck with me for a while. What's even weirder though is that my brother doesn't have a history of sleepwalking, and he hadn't done anything like that before or since. And, of course, he doesn't remember anything. It has always creeped me out that, even while asleep, he followed me, and he was that close to where I hid in the garage.
Number 1.
Shit.
My name is Alyssa, and I have a few stories which seem to fit for this channel. But the first one, it's about a doll which my mum bought me when I was a little girl, around 9 or 10 years old.
Oh boy.
The doll was called Amazing Amy.
Oh
There was a
boy.
big display for it, and lots of accessories which you could buy. She bought just the basic kit containing the doll and a few outfits. On Christmas Day, I opened it and I immediately fell in love with it. I carried it everywhere, and I loved how it talked and had a heart display on its chest to display the time. There was also an option to set up an alarm which would prompt her to cry, like a real baby. I carried that doll everywhere I went. My mum returned to the store a few weeks later to purchase a few more items for the doll, and was puzzled when she saw that there was nothing for it, and it seemed like it didn't even exist. She asked the store manager about the doll and its products, and he said that he didn't know anything about it, and that she should check back in at a later time. Of course,
I hate
she only
dolls,
told me this
dude.
once
I
was
hate
old,
them, man.
and
I hate
I still have the
dolls.
doll, and I'm now 24 years old.
Oh,
My
it's
mum had a
staring
doll
at
sitting
me.
underneath a panther table, which was in the middle of a living room. She
It's
would brush its
staring
hair
into
into
my
pigtails
soul.
and kept an old dress of mine.
Oh, I just
from
felt the
when I
chill
was a
go up my
baby.
spine, man. It ain't even the
One
damn
day,
story,
though,
it's the fucking
I noticed that
image.
the doll had some dirt on it, and so my mum cleaned its
Ooh.
face and placed it on the TV stand. A few days later, though, it was dirty once again, as if someone was playing with it. There are only 4 members of my household, which are my parents, myself, and my younger brother, who was 3 years old at the time. This happened when I was 18 and just graduating from high school, so my brother was 15 at the time and he was really into gaming. We kind of just shrugged it off and went on with life. A few years later, and I'm in college and I have a college friend over to study, we finish our studying and are watching an old movie in the living room with the front door open since it's a warm night. It's about 2 or something in the morning when we hear Amy start to talk. We both looked at each other confused and looked on top of the TV to see Amy sitting there. And then she just started to laugh and repeat a phrase. We both booked it into my room, closing the door immediately. We were sitting there on the bed,
I just got
scared
goosebumps.
because I informed my friend that we
My
would
hair
keep
is
batteries
raising.
in.
I do not like
The reason
dolls,
being
man. I
to keep
don't
them
like
from
them.
corroding. Realizing that we had to go back out there to close and lock the front door.
I don't
along
care.
with
I ain't going
the
after
living
that
room
fucking
TV,
doll.
I gathered my courage and I pulled my friend along, and we complete these tasks as quickly as possible. Amy, of course, was still in her spot and she didn't speak, which made us feel a little relieved, but we rushed back to my room anyhow. We slept with my TV on since the sound made us feel. at
Fuck
least a
that,
little
dude. Now, why are you sleeping
a
in
year
that
later,
house?
My mum found out that my
No!
brother had a girlfriend and thought it would be a good idea to let his girlfriend take Amy, since she had an alarm and was like a real baby who required changing, feeding, and bottles. So my mum put batteries in it and set the alarm for early in the morning. She told my brother's girlfriend,
Since you want to be with my son, this will make you think twice before thinking of becoming intimate.
My brother's girlfriend shrugged it off and took Amy home, knowing that my mother actually had a point. My brother received a call early that morning to come and pick up the doll, since she was freaked out. My brother and I rushed over to the house, which was just a few blocks away, and I took Amy from his girlfriend. I immediately began questioning her about the dirt and the blue paint on the doll's face and hands, and she shook her head saying,
I don't know. I woke up to the crying alarm and I saw that. And when I went to turn it off, it really freaked me out.
We got home and told my mum immediately, and we could never figure out exactly what happened that day. But even to this day, Amy manages to get dirty all the time, and we can't explain why this happens. But whenever I try to give her to a relative, they always call me back up and ask me to take it back or come by and comment at how weird things have happened, and they don't want it anymore. This may sound a little fake, but these are true experiences, and they're still puzzling me and my family. I still have the amazing Amy doll, and find little to nothing on the internet when I go to look it up, which makes it even more weird. This, by far, is the strangest Christmas present I've ever received.
Fuck that. Burning it. Burn that shit to the ground. You fucking jump scare me with that doll. I'm gonna be pissed, Buster. I'm gonna be pissed. Don't you fucking do me like that. Woo! I hate dolls. Oh, that was the creepiest one of them all. Ugh. Ugh. Hell no, man. Hell to the fuck no, 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 no. No. That is not how I roll. That is not how I do things. I would burn that bastard to the ground or give it to a church. Then I would baptize myself and sage my house. Then I'd sell it. No. That doll is evil. You heard it laugh at you. You heard it. If you're watching this, you heard it. Got me chicken behind me and shit. Man, I hate fucking dolls. Ugh. Alright guys, that concludes this video. Comment below if you hate dolls. And make sure you like if you hate dolls, and make sure you subscribe if you are anti-doll establishment. And as always, I will see you in the next video if I haven't cried myself to sleep.